Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to See Yourself Running, the realities of running as Asian Americans. My name is Craig, and I'm the Senior Political Manager here at Run for Something, and want to thank you for being here. A few reminders before we start. If you would like to view live captions on your screen, please click the More menu in the lower right-hand corner and select Show Subtitle. We also have Amber and Shelley, two wonderful ASL interpreters with us tonight. For meeting norms, we ask folks to be present and respectful of each other. Feel free to share resources in the chat and also be discerning when clicking on any links that are shared by anyone who is not one of our staff, partners, or alum. Now for the agenda, we'll start with alumni sharing their stories, and in the last half, we'll do a Q&A session. Please put any questions you have for the panel in the Q&A box, and we will pull questions from there, not from the chat box. With that being said, let's get started. Run for Something recruits and supports passionate, diverse, young progressives running for local office, and we support them with coaching, mentorship, resources, and endorsements. More specifically, Run for Something endorses diverse, progressive candidates who are 40 and under, running for the first, second, or third time, and running for local offices like City Council or the State Senate. At Run for Something, we believe local elected leaders directly influence people's everyday lives and have a deep impact on the issues and solutions. What does this all have to do with Asian Americans? Well, Asian Americans are the country's fastest growing demographic and the least represented in all levels of government. We know that that has to change, and it starts with young Asian American progressives running for state and local office. And Run for Something is here for it. We provide coaching for our endorsed candidates and provide resources and training while connecting candidates with partners who can help win their campaigns. Run for Something has endorsed over 2,500 candidates and won over 1,000 elections. Over 50% of our endorsed candidates identify as women or non-binary. Over 50% identify as BIPOC, and over 50% identify as LGBTQIA+. We also support progressive Asian American candidates with a strong community of staff, including Holly, our community manager, who will join us to answer questions in a bit, and Francis, who will be sharing resources in the chat. We also have a strong community of alum who you'll hear from in a bit, and partners such as Nadia Belkin, the executive director of the Asian American Power Network, who is joining us tonight as our co-moderator. We also work with our alumni to support current candidates and to make connections that will help them run and govern successfully once elected. We have two Run for Something alumni joining us tonight who will be sharing their experiences about what it was like to run as an Asian American candidate. Commissioner Shung couldn't make it tonight, but we're glad to welcome Representative Adrian Tam, who represents District 24 in the Hawaii House. He is a second-generation Asian American and was the first openly gay member of the Hawaii State Legislature when he was first elected in 2020. In 2022, he was re-elected to serve as the representative of the newly redistricted District 24 Waikiki. Assemblywoman Cecelia González, who represents District 16 in the Nevada State Assembly. She is a Thai Mexican American and the daughter of immigrants. She has dedicated her life to public service as an educator and organizer, focusing on issues like criminal justice reform and women's rights. And with that, I'd like to introduce Nadia Belkin, ED of the Asian American Power Network, to start tonight's panel portion.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you all for joining us today. Running as an Asian American candidate has its own unique set of challenges. Representative Tam, I'd love to start with you. Can you share what your top challenge was running as an Asian American candidate, and how did you address it? Is there anything that you might have done differently?
Thank you so much for the question. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to Run for Something for hosting such an excellent panel, especially as we start off May as Asian American History Month. In Hawaii, it's very different. So Hawaii, our population is actually a majority of Asian Americans. I actually had more of a challenge running my race because I was young. I didn't have that much experience, and I was going up against a 14-year incumbent in the Democratic primary who was very close to leadership. And that was pretty much an uphill battle, and that was the biggest challenge. If I had to identify anything that is kind of a challenge running as an Asian American is that I did run in a district that is predominantly white American, but is really split between Asian American and white. But I really didn't talk about my race. I really talked about the issues and the things that are going to help my residents and my constituents improve their quality of life. I ran as a candidate that is purely about changing the system and making the system work for the people that are living in Hawaii and are calling this place home. Hawaii has a very high cost of living. We have a housing crisis right now, and our education system is currently at a dismal because we are underfunding it. Our teachers need a raise, and our roads are not to the best right now too. So if there's anything that I wish I could do differently, I think that it would be to really talk more about what it means to be an LGBT member in a society right now, because prior to myself, there had been LGBT representatives, but they've all left. And for a long period of time, there wasn't. And I knew how much that meant to little kids who didn't have anyone to look up to and didn't have someone that they can see in leadership so that, they could feel accepted when they grow up. And since then, I have become more vocal on these issues. I founded the Equality Caucus in the legislature that champions LGBT rights. We had to open it up to, allies, because it's just a party of one. And since the past election, I believe we have now doubled our LGBT representatives in the House, so from 1 to 2. And in the City Council, 2 out of 9 City Council members are LGBT as well.
Thank you, Representative. Those are phenomenal and exciting points to know that there's already been so much success and change in your home state. I wanted to kind of harken back to what Craig had mentioned, reading some of the statistics around the different types of candidates that run for something supports. And I think representation is so key. I think opportunities such as this one as well give people exposure and access to a better understanding of what it means to run for office. And I think also focusing on the youth and understanding that that really is going to be the next generation is really, really phenomenal. And I think it was interesting that you named youth because I actually feel like your lived experience is really what has driven your career and is what is allowing you to relate to voters. I think in work that we've done before, there's been a little bit of a knowledge gap, I think, in terms of how these issues impact the voter themselves. So thank you for naming all of those really concrete examples that were the cornerstone of your platform. Holly, I'd love to bring you in, especially thinking about representation. Can you talk to us a little bit as a campaign staffer for an Asian American candidate? What do you think is the top challenge for Asian American women candidates in particular?
Thanks for asking. Frankly, it's enoughness, the idea of enoughness. I think prior to Asian American women pursuing leadership or anywhere, whether it's political field or elsewhere, I think we have to grapple with this idea of enoughness, not because it is our fault that we think that way, but because one of the insidious impacts of sexism and racism and all the ways we've been touched by oppressive systems is this idea of we're not good enough, we aren't qualified enough, we're not experienced enough, all of that. And I think that is a top challenge, because if we cannot break that shell, it is difficult to then say, I'm going to run for office and win. So I think that is a top challenge. And the way that I think about it is kind of like my Run for Something colleagues will know this, but like I love plants, and the analogy that I use for something like this is that it's kind of like a seed, right? And in order for us to grow, the seed actually needs to break that barrier in order for it to like develop and grow and produce and do all the things that it does for us as humans, whether that's like medicine or food, etc. And the way we do that is we need, as Asian American women, need to have the nutrients, right? So, and the right conditions. And so what that means is, what does your support system look like? So I would ask 2 questions around what does this like enoughness situation look like for me if I am grappling with some of those questions? And I think the second would be, how do I then create an environment that allows me to have the support to be able to basically like destroy this shell that is kind of like placed on us. And I think that's important because there's kind of internalized unlearning that needs to happen. And when we do then, you know, when I do then see Asian American women decide, oh, I'm going to run for office, you then have to kind of do a similar process, not internally, but externally. You have to be able to share your story in a way that connects and moves people. Because there are going to be people who are like, you don't belong here. And I've never seen an Asian American woman be a leader of anything. I've never seen them be represented in government, all of that, right? And again, to combat that, it's important to have the right environment. And one of the ways you do that is by making sure you have people around you to be that support system. So do you have a strong team? Who are your family? Who are your friends who are going to help support you through something like this? Because running for office is going to be really hard. I have not done it myself, but as a staffer, I have just seen how difficult it is for candidates. And it's also important to have a plan, have a really great communications plan, field plan, and fundraising plan, and the people to help you push those things forward. So I think this idea of enoughness is a top challenge, and there are ways to overcome it.
Thank you, Holly. What I heard from that as well is the way that we have to carry our lived experiences into these spaces. You know, our lives matter, our voices matter, and our experiences are so critical. Our understanding of the world, and I think the way policy and legislation impacts us, does make us vehicles to catalyze change. And I think especially that female voice is so underrepresented. So thank you for naming those components of the structure internally that one must have, as well as externally. I think those things have to work in tandem. Representative Tam, I'd love to turn it back to you. You talked about some of the issues that are really critical to your community. Can you talk to us about how you identified those and how you spent time in community addressing and identifying those challenges?
Thank you. You know, communication is oftentimes the key to being successful, in my opinion. So during the campaign and even after the campaign, I consistently keep in contact with constituents here in my district, whether it's sitting down and going through a list of phone numbers and spending even sometimes 2 hours on and talking to someone, or 5 minutes with them, to going door to door and knocking on their doors and talking to them about what issues they face. From that, I was able to compile a list of issues that they care about, so that eventually when I do have a town hall here, I can come prepared with answers to address those questions that they may have as a collective that I may not have gotten in contact with, because everyone here is facing this similar kind of issue. I want to circle this back to this whole idea of youth thing. So Holly's absolutely right when it comes to this idea of enoughness. And sometimes when you get elected as a candidate, especially when you're young, you have to go above and beyond. You feel like you have to go above and beyond to prove that, you know, millennials and Gen Zers are not some lazy slob and they're just here for vanity purposes. Older legislators can get away with that, you know, to be funny. So I've had this conversation with my staff, which was they wanted me to kind of, do more TikTok dances or have some more fun on Instagram. That's fine and all, but I had to tell them that, being young, we walk a fine line because I don't want to come off across as immature, not prepared, and not ready. I have done a lot to try to dispel those kind of stereotypes of young people by staying long hours at the Capitol, by delivering on critical infrastructure needs in my district, to ensuring that we pass bills to address the quality of life of every single person living here. But older legislators, they'll never be questioned about their maturity. If they do something immature, they're just saying, haha, there's that funny old uncle that's, saying things and being funny. He's a great legislator, even though he's not, or whatever. So that is another challenge that I just identified while I was listening to everyone talk. So I don't know what everyone else makes of that, but that's how I see it. Especially when you're young and you're in a position of power, you feel like you have to go above and beyond. And all I can say is, you go above and beyond. You're supposed to do that anyway. You're a public servant. You are serving your district. You're trying to improve the quality of life. You should be going above and beyond to make sure that things are getting adequately funding, that you're fighting for their needs and wants.
Thank you for naming that, because it's such a tricky balance. You want to relate to your constituents, you want to make the information digestible and approachable, but there is a counter argument to saying and countering some of those stereotypes that as millennials we do carry, which is unfortunate, knowing how hard we really do work. Have you found that being, the ways that you have named showing up for your fellow legislators and for your community, have you seen a shift in attitude from any of your colleagues?
So for my colleagues, it's different. I think that they were able to see the work that I was able to do. And for my community, they've also see the work that I do. But for my colleagues, they don't, especially my colleagues at least, they don't really view young people as lazy. But if you carry yourself that way and you are young, they're just not going to give you, they're just not going to want to work with you. They're just not going to take you seriously. I am the only person in my sophomore class that became a chair of the committee this year. And that is not something easy. And because I became a chair, I feel like, I carry this huge burden to try to, dispel these stereotypes that, young people only want to just get into office to be fun. And I believe that, the work that I've done and a lot of the work that some of my younger legislators have done have also contributed to dispelling a lot of these stereotypes that, now my colleagues are putting younger people in positions of power, giving them leadership roles and trusting them more on various issues and topics. And I attribute that to a lot of the younger legislators, because they also realize at one point that this job isn't about vanity anymore. It is about being a public servant.
Let's go back to the beginning, because I think that that's, knowing how you are showing up for the community has been so successful, and you're obviously doing a lot of work to cultivate relationships internally and externally. The term imposter syndrome does come up sometimes when one might think about running for office. Did you ever face that? Does it come up for you, and how have you negotiated that for yourself?
Imposter syndrome is something that I still deal with today. So, and that's normal. That's normal. Every single legislator, no matter how old you are, will feel some sort of imposter syndrome. I was talking to another legislator in another state that's like 60 years old, and he feels like he does not belong in his legislature because he doesn't have the same accolades as everyone else in his chamber. But here's the thing. you have to put that all aside. You have to have confidence in yourself when you're in that building, because a lot is riding on you to be successful. When you are successful, your district is successful. And, that's kind of how I got over it. I have to think about, what's the bigger picture around. It's not about me anymore. It is about the state of Hawaii and my constituents in District 24.
Thank you. And I think the honesty of, yes, it happens and I still face it today is really refreshing, because I think that we try and often put on a face that it's going to work, it's going to be okay. But you have such a unique and such an important role. So thank you for being so open about that.
It's also it's also a good thing that I have imposter syndrome, because it keeps me on everything that I do. I'm more careful, more meticulous about the things that are coming out of my office. So it keeps me on my toes, is all I can say.
Yes, I feel like the ego can cut you down sometimes. Holly, I'd love to turn that question over to you, especially as there are women on this call that might be thinking about running. How have you seen it show up for a candidate, and any support or maybe resources that you found to help combat that?
Yeah, I think as Representative Tam says, I think it happens more often than we think. I often ask a couple of questions when I experience it, or if a candidate comes to me and talks about it. I ask, is it one, true? Whatever questions are coming up, is it true? Do you really not have enough experience? Do you really think you're not qualified, right? So I ask, is it true? Whatever this imposter syndrome is saying about you. And the second is is it kind? Because you want to be on your own team. And so I usually ask those two questions, and it kind of helps kind of calm whatever anxiety comes up from the imposter syndrome. And it helps from spiraling, right? And so I think there's that. I think the other thing that I think about too is I find that leadership and organizing and all of that is kind of my way of doing healing justice. And what I mean by that is I think about, institutional racism and all the things that have happened to those before me. And I am somehow in a position now and in rooms now where my grandparents could not be in. And so I kind of bring my family with me in spaces that like literally in the 20s and 30s, there were signs in California that said no Filipinos allowed. And now I am in places where my grandfather could not come in as a farm worker to do things that he could not do at that time. And so I kind of see where I am at now and kind of see that the hard work that was done by previous generations to really stand on their shoulders and help me to think about, okay, I have these opportunities, I have these spaces, how can I make the best of it? And I try to encourage that sort of thinking and framing when I talk to candidates or leaders who are women of color, who are coming across imposter syndrome in that way. And one of the things that kind of help is visualization. So there are times where I am sometimes, more often than not, the only woman in the room and the only women of color in the room, the only Asian American woman or Asian American in the room. And so I kind of just do if I'm physically in the room, I sit down and I imagine my grandparents and my ancestors who have gone to just come in the room with me and be sit here with me. And that checks the imposter syndrome really quick for me. So I think those are some of the ways that I've done it. Oftentimes when I do intro calls, I will get a lot of questions from candidates, especially young candidates of color, queer folks, who are college students, working folks, who ask, can I really do it, right? It's a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I say, yes, you can. And the way you can do it, the resources that you have is to have, again, be prepared, like Rep. Tam said, is to have a plan, make sure that you have that comms plan, the field plan, and that fundraising plan, because people are going to underestimate you. That's not a question, but you do not want to underestimate yourself. Be confident, have a plan, have a team that will help you execute that plan. And I feel like that is how I've been able to really work with candidates. I think my win rate is actually for candidates who make it to general is 100%. And that's part of the practice. That's kind of like the reframing and the shifting we need to do to get like mentally ready and strong to like win a race.
Thank you, Holly. I am so glad to be in this work with you because I do those same calculations in rooms. And I do want to also name, we're standing on the shoulders of the generation that came before us. And so to the participants, I just want to, Francis beat me to it, putting some key resources into the chat for you as you're starting to think about the process or curious about where to start. So I think there's a real beauty in us knowing we need to create inclusive spaces, and there are resources and organizations that can lend you a helping hand as you're thinking about it or as you move forward with your next steps. So that said, Representative Tam, you are currently a representative. I'm curious, did you look at different levels of the ballot? How did you decide that this was the position you needed to run for?
Well, the question about running was all about the issues. I ran for office because, there was a number of things. The main one was housing. The current representative that was representing me was chair of the housing committee, and I didn't see anything being done. There were several comments that were made by leaders about how Hawaii's housing crisis will eventually solve itself because people are leaving the island. And that's kind of like saying, the famine is over because everyone's starved to death. And that wasn't acceptable to me. And I just felt like there was no sense of urgency coming from our legislature and our government. I felt that, there was a lack of representation of young people, LGBT people. I felt that I could do a better job. And the one thing that really pushed me over to running officially as a candidate is I asked myself, would I forgive myself if I didn't run for office? Would it be better just to not run for office, save myself all this time, find probably a different job or whatever, or run for office and figure out what that unknown was going to be and what that answer was going to be? And I said, yeah, no, I cannot forgive myself if I didn't run for office, and it would eat me alive if I didn't find out what amazing things I could have done if I didn't run. You cannot be afraid to lose. And that's like the number one thing that I want everyone to leave this panel with, if anything. Out of all the things we say, you cannot be afraid to lose. And, losing is very scary. I can say that. I fear about losing in election or an election. Yeah, sure. That's your name. And you might wonder, like, that's your reputation. But, if you're going in afraid of losing, then I probably would not recommend running for office, but probably helping another candidate run for office.
So it sounds like then, Representative, you really focused on leading with values. Does that sound right?
Absolutely.
And did you feel like when you presented the platform, the issue that was really driving you to run for office, that you found support within the community, even when you were just considering the idea?
Yes, actually, not many people knew who I was until I ran for office. I was just a staffer. I've never ran before. I didn't have any name recognition, and it was very hard to raise money, especially when you're running against an incumbent, because when you're raising money, you're asking people to invest in you, and you have to prove to them that you're capable of winning. But I was able to garner the endorsement of the Teachers Association, Sierra Club, the largest private sector union, the hotels union, progressive organizations, and I was able to line them up to build a winning campaign as I was running. So what I can say about campaigns is that they're very unpredictable when it comes to who's going to win. Like, I started in the polls like at the very bottom, but I still ran for office. And as I started going, my campaign started gaining momentum. And it was just enough at that time that I was able to win with 144 votes. So I am eternally grateful for the 145 people that voted on election day to put me over the top. And it's just about running to make change. You have to run for change. You have to run for the right values that you want, I think, because people can sense that authenticity when you're at that door or you're talking to them over the phone. They want to know whether you understand these issues and that you can fight for them. And it really shows. People can tell. That's what I can say.
Thank you, Representative. I think that is such an honest understanding around what drives a campaign, and you as a candidate as well, seeing the community. Also, hopefully this is a friendly reminder to all participants that your vote matters. I mean, these races are so exceptionally close, and knowing the way that your campaign and the way that your candidacy moved right to secure you a spot as an elected official, watching the way that the polling evolved, I think that's a really important component of stay true to your values and stay true to the messaging, right, that's driving the campaign. So that said, actually, Holly, I'd love to shift it back to you as you're thinking about key components of a campaign. The representative mentioned raising money, so having a fundraising plan seems really important, but also communications, right? Values are at the crux of it. So curious, key components of a campaign plan.
Yes, so I think a huge part of it is a field plan. And I am an organizer at heart. So having a really effective grassroots organizing component to your field plan is going to really help you have a successful and winning campaign. I think it's also really important to have a good communications foundation. What I mean by that is you have to be able to tell your story and make connections with people who have never heard of you, likely, if you're young and don't have that social capital or name recognition. Typically, you want to work on your stories of self. So what that means is your who, what's, and why. The reason why, and actually, if anyone is interested in a Run for Something endorsement, we actually focus on those 3 components in our endorsement application. And in a way, that is our way of helping you prepare for your communication foundation, because every single day of the campaign, you're going to be asked, who are you? Why are you running? What are the issues? All of these things. And so it's really important to be clear and prepared to be able to tell your story, and how you can connect your story to the people that you're serving and the community is going to be really important, because it's not just about you, it's you moving the community to work with you on these issues, right? And so I actually get more into these pieces in our candidate intro call, which we'll link to in a little bit. So I have so much, it's really a lot of information that I think would be really helpful for folks to have to join that call. But I think that is a bit of a preview, is that it's really important to have that field plan. Grassroots organizing component is really important. A comms plan with your stories of us and of self, and having that fundraising plan is really important. I think the one thing that candidates that I notice sometimes holds them back is the fundraising. They're like, oh my gosh, I have to raise how much money? I don't even have that much money in the bank. Or I've never seen that much money ever in my life. My family has never seen that much money ever. And so I think there has to be some, again, using that seed example, have some unlearning and also some relearning and reframing of how to do that. One of the ways that I help candidates reframe is that you're not asking people to give you money to like buy new shoes. You're asking people to invest in your vision of a different world, a different community, one that is for you, for the community, and for change, right? And so when candidates tend to shift their thinking around that, they become more effective at fundraising.
Thank you, Holly. I think that was such a phenomenal foreshadow and skeleton for people to start thinking about those critical components. Again, please check out the chat for some of those resources that can help you start thinking about the conversation. The last question I have, because I'm seeing some really phenomenal questions in the chat itself. Representative Tam, I feel like you've given us a lot of really great advice and guidance. Thinking back to your days on the campaign, what is one critical piece of advice you would give to someone thinking about running for office?
I had to think long and hard about this question, but I think my single biggest advice, and I think this is what put me over the top, was to be a different candidate than your opponent or any other candidate that is running in other races surrounding yours. What I did differently in my campaign that is different from other opponent than my opponent and everyone else is that I laid out the plans that I want, the vision that I want for Hawaii and for the district, and how I was going to fight for them. I put out concrete plans and ideas out there that I felt would enhance the quality of life on my website, and I made it open and I was able to answer any questions that anyone has on it. Most candidates, when they begin putting together a website, they just put stuff like, I will support small businesses, I will support our workers, I support sidewalks being repaired, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a plan. I think that, if you're going to be a candidate, you have to be better about it. You have to actually tell the people and show them and demonstrate to them what you're going to do. Have a vision that they can, hold on to so they are trusting of you. That being said, a lot of that was inspired by Elizabeth Warren. She didn't win her presidential election, but a lot of the candidates that followed her lead and did the same thing all won theirs.
Thank you, Representative Tam. I'm really hearing that there is room for all of our voices, and that partnership is going to be really critical to being able to bring that voice to fruition as well. We are now joined by an additional panelist today, Assemblywoman González. I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you for the flexibility. As we know, the legislative session is pretty crazy and when we're in session. So hi, everyone. My name is Assemblywoman Cecelia González, and I represent Assembly District 16 in the Nevada legislature. And a little bit about myself, I am half Thai and half Mexican. My mother migrated here from Thailand at a young age, and my father's family migrated here from Mexico. And so I hold both identities very near and dear to my heart. I'm a PhD student studying education, focusing on multicultural education, and really this intersection of the justice system and education. And what my dissertation focuses on is is what is that experience like for people that identify as Asian American and as Latino, because there's a gap in that experience in the research. I also I teach in K through 12 as a substitute teacher. And this fall, I'll be teaching 5th grade. So I'm really excited about that. And then I also teach at the collegiate level. I teach valuing equity and diversity in higher education. And then I also teach race, class, and gender in America. And so that's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for staying in ledge session late. We know that the issues matter and we need our advocates on the floor. We are going to move to the Q&A section, but first we want to open it with a poll, and Craig, I will turn it back to you for that.
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you, panelists, for getting us started by sharing your stories and experiences. Before we open up the floor to questions, we want to make sure that you drop your questions into the Q&A box, and we're going to launch the poll now. On this poll, there's going to be several questions, but I'm going to go through, some of the things that we have at Run for Something and that we offer at Run for Something. So if you're interested in talking more about your plans to run for office and brainstorming next steps, you can opt in for a call with the Run for Something volunteer. If you opt in to speak with a volunteer, you will receive an email from them in the next few weeks to find a time that works for the both of you to talk for the next 30 minutes about, or some 30 minutes about your campaign plans. If you're running for office in 2023 and this year and are applying for an endorsement, the volunteer call will serve as an endorsement interview. If you are still thinking about running, the volunteer will ask questions that will help you figure out what to do next. And while you're waiting for, as we're waiting for everyone to complete the poll, please feel free to add more questions or drop more questions for our panelists in the Q&A box. Next, if you want to learn more about Run for Something, our endorsement process and top tips to get your campaign started, or join us for a candidate intro call, we will drop the sign up link in the chat, and you'll also get it in a follow-up email. That being said, I know we have several Q&A questions. Nadia, you and I can switch off and alternate off of these. But I think the first one I'm going to ask, and maybe Assemblywoman González, you can take this. Catherine asks, I would love to hear more about how AAPI folks balance bringing their full selves, especially multidimensional identities, to the table versus trying to fit into the boxes that people are comfortable seeing us in, especially when constituents aren't majority AAPI.
That's a great question. And I love that I get to open on that. And so, I think for me, I don't hide who I am. I'm very open about my identity. I think for me, I'm a little unique in the sense that I also study identity. And so it's something that I'm very passionate about. I always tell my story about how I decided to run for office. And that was when Nevada became the first female majority legislature in the 2019 session. There were not women that looked like me. There was 2 Democratic Asian identifying legislators at that time. And so when I got here, we had what's called opening day, and there's normally like a ceremony. We do like our like oaths and things like that, and we have our family here. And I, every year on the first day, whether it's a regular session or a special session, make it a point to wear my tie regalia. And why that's important is because it is a way that I can bring my identity and my culture to the Nevada legislature. I think it's what people expect now, right? Like, it's the first day, I'm going to be in my beautiful tie wear. I think that it can be challenging to navigate how your identities show up, when and where, and how it can be helpful and how it can be hurtful. I think that for myself, going from the candidate now to elected, I'm still learning how to balance those things. However, I'm unapologetically Asian. I'm unapologetically Latina. Like, those are parts of myself that I don't separate, because it's what makes me who I am, and it's why I'm here in this body. We have a legislator who was newly elected here, who in every hearing we're asking and talking about language access for our communities. And so, I think it can be tough at times, but also when you're really proud of who you are, you make that a non-negotiable and you show up as your full self, right? And again, we talk about playing the game, right? The political game, the machine, and things like that can be difficult. But at the same time, I had my tie and my Mexican flags on the floor. I have, things that, having Thai New Year during the legislative session, bringing that culture to the legislature again is really important for myself.
Okay, let's see. There's a whole trove here. Here's a really interesting one, especially as we're focused on the AAPI community. Terry asked, I really want to have AAPI community support. What suggestions do you have to begin building AAPI fundraising power so they might not, apologies. How do we build fundraising power when they might not be aware of the system?
Okay, so I think one of the things that I did when it came to AAPI groups was that I was able to connect with various organizations, such as the Chinese American Society, to the Japanese Cultural Center groups, to talk about my candidacy. In Hawaii is really different. Like I said, we are all Asian Americans are like the majority here, but it does help to go out to them and reach out to them for help, because when you do reach out to them for help, they feel wanted, they feel like they can have a purpose and they want to be involved. And, to see representation, especially if you're running in a non-Asian American majority area, would be very beneficial for them. So the worst they can say is no, is what I can tell you. The worst thing to say is no. And if they say no, you just move on to the next group. You can't just, mope about it. You just got to move on. But it doesn't hurt to ask. Always ask for help.
I would like to add on to that. I think there is a misconception that our community is not engaged and that our community is not part of these conversations or at the table. And so, like my colleague said, make the ask. I will say during my first campaign, I did make an ask to one of our groups, and I was told no, actually, and so it is very important to continue to network and make and build those relationships. And just because one group told you no does not mean that that's not the path for you. And it doesn't mean that they're end all be all, right? We're a very diverse community. Just because one organization told me no, I ended up getting support from others. And so, just keep that in mind as well.
Thank you both. I think that ask for help is so critical. And I did want to just mention the Asian American Power Network represents grassroots organizations that are on the ground. They do year-round organizing specifically for the Asian American community, and it is pan-Asian to be inclusive. So I just want to remind you all as well to tap into grassroots organizing, who has their finger on the pulse of things as well. We're active in 12 different states. So thank you, Francis, because I know Assemblywoman González, the one API in Nevada is definitely present on the ground in state.
All right, moving on to a question from Christopher. Christopher asks, how do you make the sacrifice to go from public office and take a pay cut from your old job? This might also be for folks who, are in part-time legislatures. I'm a child of refugees and worked hard for the current job I enjoy. Who would like to take that?
I can start. Oh, you want to go? So for me, I think I'm situated a little differently. I am a PhD student. I'm still reaching my career point. I also ran for office at 28 years old. And so, for me, I didn't have this like built up career or portfolio. However, being in the Nevada legislature and being a PhD student, my work was connected to my university, and our university is considered a state entity. And so I was not allowed to work for my state while being at the legislature. I have to resign every session. With that being said, I think I really relate to folks like the everyday working hardworking families when they talk about trying to make ends meet, because I'm also trying to make ends meet. I don't, again, have this like long, extensive career. So I think it can be a challenge. I think that when you're like married and you have children and you have families, it's definitely a larger conversation. For me, I'm not at that point. And so making the jump to run for public office, knowing we don't get paid, was like, well, I'm doing all this work for free now anyway, right? And so that was kind of my way to the legislature. However, I am married now, and these are conversations my husband and I are currently having about, how are we going to plan for our future with you in this role? What does that look like? And so it is a very real and part of the decision making, I would say.
For myself, I actually took a pay increase for this job. I was a staffer at the legislature, and I did real estate on the side. So I did make that jump for a pay increase, but living in Hawaii, it's still not enough, because even with the pay increase that we just got in our legislature, someone like myself making that kind of income would qualify for public housing assistance and rental subsidies here. But, for anyone taking a pay cut, you really have to just look at the bigger picture, whether you're not, you are serious about making change. And for a lot of people, they are. It's a huge sacrifice, I understand, but if it's not you, then who else would do it? If you believe that you're going to be able to make the change, if you're the one that can make someone's life better, you have to go for it, and you have to be prepared, especially when you want to make the change. And like I said in my previous comments, you don't have to be the candidate. You can always volunteer and help someone get elected by going door to door for them, or donating money to them, or volunteering for them in any other capacity that you can. I always emphasize this to people, which is, you don't have to be the candidate. You don't have to be the elected official. It's very, very difficult. It's a lifestyle that not many people understand. My dating life was so messed up when I got elected. And eventually I found a partner that was very understanding and tolerated a lot. But, it's very difficult to ask someone to make that sacrifice. So if you aren't able to make that sacrifice, there are other ways to create change in your community by supporting a candidate or getting involved with a nonprofit that does work.
Building on that, we have another question here. What was the final push that got you over the line in deciding to run for the first time?
The final push was that I just got really upset at the way things were going. And I never thought that I was going to run for office. I worked at the legislature just as a staffer, and I was perfectly fine being invisible and being a staffer and helping my amazing senator get his agenda done. But it's hard when you look at your boss as this amazing legislature and see that nothing's getting passed because there are other people in office that are preventing it. So I took it upon myself to just run for office because I was frustrated. And sometimes that frustration is what keeps you going. It's what makes you not want to give up on these things. For me, that was what was kind of like the final push. It was, good initiatives that aren't being passed because several people just didn't want to move on them.
And I agree. I will say, before becoming a legislator, I was really involved in the legislative process with different organizations, coming up to the legislature, lobbying for bills. And when we couldn't pass ending cash bail, I just remember being so frustrated. And I remember thinking back to a lot of the conversations that I was having with people. They were often men, they were often older, and they were often white. Even women, right? And I just remember being so frustrated, thinking like, you will never have any idea what it means to be a person of color experiencing the criminal justice system. And I was so mad. And I just remember having these conversations with legislators that were not thought-provoking, you know what I mean? And just thinking like, wow, if these people can come up here and have these, mundane conversations, then someone like me can come up here and have those conversations while including our community at the forefront.
I think that's a powerful way to sort of conclude this panel, Assemblywoman. Ensuring that you are living by your values, communicating your values, being unapologetically yourself, and standing up for the communities that you represent, because that's why you ultimately choose to run for office and make a difference in your community, as Representative Tam had mentioned. Folks, I want to make sure that we get you out of here on time. We want to thank you for being here, for being present, for being engaged, for asking all the questions. There are some that will be responded to via text, so please stay to read those responses, and our staff is willing to give you the resources that you need and that you're looking for. We hope to see yourself running, and if you're still in need of more guidance, we hope you join us for a candidate intro call. I see that Assemblywoman González has her hand raised, so I'm going to yield to you.
Thank you so much. I just have a little run for something plug. When I was getting ready to run for office, I had a little bit of institutional knowledge because I had worked campaigns. I worked the 2020 cycle. The 2018 was actually my first cycle. And so I had a little bit of knowledge. However, I remember seeing this organization called Run for Something about how they were helping young folks run for office. And I just happened to be in LA at the same time that they were having an event actually in Pasadena. And I went and I met Amanda, the founder of Run for Something. And I will just never forget how she was so inspiring in her speech about, if you want to run for office, we will help you get there. And going through their website, there are so many tools that if you are not familiar with the campaign world, that will help you get familiar. And I just want to say a huge thank you because I'm here today for organizations like Run for Something, New American Leaders that do candidate trainings. Please take advantage of these resources that help you run for office. They kind of know what they're talking about. So I just wanted to put that plug. Thank you.
Yeah, Run for Something has been very, very helpful in my campaign. They offered some great advice. If there's anything I want to leave everyone with too is, the issue of fundraising. I know it's very scary to ask for money, but one advice that I was given from another candidate was to practice with your friends a business pitch for your campaign. Go. And you shouldn't just pick one friend. You pick like 3 or 5 or 6 friends to do this. It makes it less scary when you really do make the ask for money to other people. And just keep practicing. It's like a business pitch. You're asking them to invest in you. You show them how you're gonna run, show them what the money is gonna go towards, show them why it's important you need the money and how many votes it's gonna bring in. Tell them, what you're currently doing to win. And when you have a nice business plan like that, or a campaign plan, people are going to want to invest, and that's donations.
I love it. We love to see that as you're talking about your values and as you're communicating who you are and why you're running for office, that a donation is an investment in you and what you stand for. So thank you. I want to give just a huge shout out to our Run for Something alumni, Representative Tam, Assemblywoman González. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge and for your wisdom. Nadia, thank you for being here and for representing the Asian American Power Network and the work that you all do to support folks, young Asian Americans as well, who are thinking about running for office. And to those in the audience, thank you for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us tonight. If you have any feedback for our team, please share it with us. We'll put the feedback form link in the chat. And lastly, everyone on this call will be getting an email from us with resources from Run for Something to help you get started and motivated, even if you're not thinking about running for office immediately. So folks, again, thank you for being here. Have a beautiful night. Peace and love. Take care.